continuing on. My name again is Jim Craven. My Blackfoot name is Omachko Kiaipoi. And we're continuing on now with Module 5, launching into our discussion and continuing our discussion on treaties. What do treaties mean? What are your rights? Etc. Okay? Now remember where we left off last time. We said that treaties are covenants between sovereign nations. So whenever a treaty is formed between two sovereign nations, each is recognizing the other as exactly that. Okay? There are no treaties. So in other words, when there's a treaty between the Lakota or the Blackfoot people, it is not a Native American treaty. It is a treaty between two sovereign governments. And for the purposes of the treaty, they're assumed to be co-equal. Okay? The basic principle in law is all people are rational, therefore no one would make an agreement that was not in their interest. Therefore any agreement has to be seen to be mutually in the interest of both parties. Okay? So there are no Native American treaties. That doesn't exist. And so when people call themselves Native American, what they're doing basically is removing themselves from the protection of their status as a member of a distinct nation, as well as protection under the treaties. Because as soon as you say I'm Native American, rather than I'm Lakota, I'm Blackfoot, okay, I'm Aponka, I'm Diné, whatever nation you're from, as soon as you call yourself a generic Native American, you've removed yourself not only from your nation, but from the protection of your nation, the culture of your nation specifically. And you've removed yourself from any protection under the treaty, the terms of the treaty of your nation, whatever it happens to be. If you're from a nation that does not have a treaty, and this is in the case of Canada, it doesn't matter. The fact that they've made treaties with other nations means that they understand that a treaty has to be made. Because whenever you make a treaty, we said this before, the treaty is signed by the authorities of the nation on behalf of the people, the Oyate, of the whole nation. What does that mean? It means then that each side recognizes not only the sovereignty of the other, but the authorities of the other to sign the treaty. And they also recognize, whether they like it or not, the system of governance that produced the leadership that had the authority to sign for everyone under their authority, binding them not only in the present, but binding them in the future to the terms of the treaty. And we said before that treaties are about peace and war, and they're also mainly about property rights. And we talked last time, we said that under a capitalist system, we acquire property rights if something is lawfully gifted to us. It means we can't receive stolen property and get to keep it even if we didn't know it was stolen. Or we can purchase, again, only lawfully. We can inherit, again, only lawfully. Or, we said before, property can be acquired lawfully through just war. But remember, it means what? It means you were the victim of aggression, not the cause of it. That's what just war means. Okay? You don't get to launch aggressive wars under pretexts and then acquire property taken lawfully. Only when you wind up, for example, as a winner of a war that you didn't start. Then there's a question of just war, acquisition of territory and title. There's also what's called a allodial title. That means you hold title because your people were the first to discover. That means there was nobody else there, because you can't discover a place with people already there. And those people made use on some way of that land. Not necessarily improving upon it, but just they roamed it, they marked it as their territory. Also, we talked last time about adverse possession. That means when the state intervenes and says, you have not claimed title to this property, use of this property, your title and use is interfering with someone else's property rights, like access or easement, and therefore, since you haven't claimed and used it for X amount of time, you've given up title or possession to that part of the land. That's called adverse possession. And finally, there's what's called eminent domain. That's when the state takes private property and pays compensation for it and basically seizes it for some kind of social purpose. But that can't be done between nations. That can only be done within a nation. In other words, you can't invoke eminent domain. One nation cannot invoke eminent domain on another nation. Okay? It can only be done like for example, a city government declaring a certain property that's in the way of a freeway. Eminent domain. Okay? And then according to the U.S. Constitution, there has to be just compensation for any land taken. Okay? So here's the problem. The settlers who came here, and this was all part of international law, even when America was founded, by the way, they knew that they had a problem here, in particular. This they knew they'd stolen. There's no question about that. They knew they had a problem here, but particularly they knew they had a problem here. So,
define here.
A problem with allodial title. A problem with claiming title, claiming to have discovered land with people already on it and using it, which means that those people had, according to law, allodial title. Okay? The same way, by the way, allodial title was also used in the Homestead Act. People don't know this. They literally issued allodial titles on land that was already occupied and had already been discovered. Okay? So they basically vitiated the original indigenous allodial titles. Okay? Now, so here's the problem. How to acquire and title property that was clearly stolen, in Western terms stolen. Okay? Property that wasn't gifted lawfully in Western terms. Okay? How to get around the problem. Well, one way, of course, and this is the history of the country, is just to ignore this. The problem with that is what? The problem is you're building a whole new society based on what are called sacred private property rights. But yet the foundation of that society is based upon violating the very same rights that you say are sacred, that you say, meaning Western society says, are absolutely fundamental to civilization, to progress, to human freedom, etc., etc., etc. So the question is then, how to get around this problem? And the way around it is to abolish one of the parties as a sovereign nation. How do you do that? Well, what that's called genocide. It comes from a Polish jurist named Raphael Limkin. And basically, it comes from two words. Genos, which means race in Greek. And cida, from Latin, which means the killing of, like homicide, etc. So genocide means literally the killing of a whole race of people. There is a 5-part test to genocide. It is defined in the 1948 UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It is an international treaty to which the United States didn't sign on until 1988, 40 years after Nuremberg and after the treaty was convened. Canada signed in 1953 and ratified in 1953. The United States did not sign and ratify the UN Convention until 1988. And then they created what was called the Helms-Lugar sovereignty exemption, which says that any of the terms of the 1948 Convention that violate the U.S. Constitution or the laws of the United States as interpreted only by the government of the United States, those terms are considered null and void and non-operable. The problem with that is Article 6, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution itself. Do you remember? Treaties shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges of each state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution of the United States or the laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. Remember what that means? It means when you sign a treaty, the terms of that treaty become incorporated into the supreme law of the land. They become part of the Constitution itself. And the paradox is that they actually trump the very Constitution of which they are now a part in event of a dispute. It means don't sign the treaty, don't ratify the treaty, unless you're prepared to keep all the terms. So one way around it is to abolish one of the parties to the treaty as a sovereign nation. In other words, to abolish their ability to keep and sign on to and to keep the terms of the treaty on their part, from their end. That means that only one party now is left, the U.S. government is left, to both interpret the treaty from this side, the opposing side, to speak for this side that's no longer a nation, as well as to speak for their own side as a sovereign nation. What's wrong with that picture? And the test for genocide is a 5-part test. Any of the following constitutes genocide. First of all, killing members of the group. It doesn't mean you kill them all. It means you're killing people because they are targeted as members of a specific group. An ethnic, racial, linguistic group, religious group of some kind. Okay? It doesn't mean you kill them all. Genocide very seldom involves killing a whole people. There's always some left. But it means killing them as a people and targeting people because they're members of that group that's targeted for elimination. Secondly, causing serious bodily and mental harm to members of the group. Again, not all of them, but it means that what you're doing is a calculated campaign to destroy people physically, emotionally, mentally, because they are members of a targeted group. Not for fun, but as part of a plan to eliminate this group as a group. Thirdly, deliberately inflicting upon a group conditions of life calculated to cause physical destruction in whole or in part. What does that mean? It means reserves, like Pine Ridge, with an average occupancy of 17 people per house. In homes that are riddled with asbestos and black mold and all kinds of conditions of life that any reasonable, prudent person would know kill. Conditions of life that nobody sane would want to live under. The people are forced to live under. And these are conditions of life calculated to cause physical destruction. Example, an EPA list of 73 proposed toxic waste sites, 72 of which are Indian reservations. So where the Nazis used to bring people to the gas chambers, now they bring the gas chambers to us. Curb service. Fourthly, imposing measures to prevent births within the group. Sterilization. The Nazis specifically cited the 1933 British Columbia race hygiene law and the laws of 27 US states sterilizing Indians and poor black people as inherently feeble-minded per se. Okay? Targeted for sterilization. According to Ward Churchill's Masters of the Race, by 1977, 40% of age-eligible, what are called fecund, it means capable of producing children, Indian women had been sterilized. Most of them did not even know they had been sterilized. Okay, it's called Fantasies of the Master Race by Ward Churchill. 40% by 1977. Most of them had no idea they had been sterilized. Many times they were sterilized as young children. In the case of young girls, you have a gynecological problem. And in the case of young boys, you have a urinary tract problem, whatever. And we're giving vasectomies to young boys and tubal ligation to young girls. Finally, number 5, transferring children from one group to another. The Indian residential schools and boarding schools. Kill the Indians, save the man, is what it means. It means transferring children. It means adoption, forced adoption. It means broken homes. It means child protective services. It means a whole bunch of ways of taking Indian kids from their homes, from their cultures, and transferring them from one group to another group. We're going to end the module here, and we're going to proceed on from this point.